Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to the first rambling video from me in a very long time. This is the very first episode of a brand new series that I think will be exclusive to the second channel only. Anyone who's a fan of, or who's been a viewer of mine since the beginning, or at least for, 8 or 9 months, probably knows that when I first started the channel, occasionally I would put up a rambling video, completely unscripted. Maybe I would have a couple of talking points, but it'd really just be me, going off, spouting off, talking about whatever I want to talk about. And I think there's something good in that. When you let your brain and your mouth, move at top speed, sometimes interesting little nuggets come out. Some of you guys don't know, but I don't really script my videos that I do, my main videos for the main EckhartsLadder channel, but I do have, talking points that I think about beforehand. I do reading and research and everything. Sometimes I'll do a brief outline, but I never have an exact script. But today I've read the question, that's it, and we are going to talk about. Like I said, this is something that I used to do a lot on the main channel, but, my audience has grown substantially since then. There's an expectation for a certain level of quality, so it's not really possible. This is supposed to kind of be preparing me for if I do a podcast or something in the future, but it'll really just be a spot where I can talk. I don't know what I'm going to put over this. Eventually, I'm going to get a full camera, like green screen, get a studio set up, but that seems to be a little bit down the line. I'll probably put some gameplay or something over this. I'm not sure. If you have any suggestions of things you'd like to see, make sure to leave them down in the comment. And of course, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this new video format. And I promise, I will get to the point in just a second. One thing you guys will learn about me if you watch a few of these videos is that I ramble a lot, which is why, this video format is kind of nice. So I posted over on the EckhartsLadder Patreon that, hey guys, looking for ideas. I'm going to be starting a new series on the second channel where I ramble as I did in the early days of the EckhartsLadder channel. Have an idea you'd like to see me talk about at length? Post in the comments here. So Ghostwriter, who's been my patron for a while, says, I have 2 ideas. What is your favorite Star Wars movie and why? And secondly, what is your favorite Star Wars character and why? So those are both great questions. I get the first one anytime I do a live stream. I get that question. So that's what we're going to tackle first. So what's my favorite Star Wars movie and why? And I've dedicated, the last year to talking about this franchise. It's completely changed the course of my professional life. So why not talk about it? It's obviously a huge part of my life. And instead of just looking at which movie is my favorite, because I think that that kind of distills things a little bit too much and it kind of limits things. What I'm going to do instead is talk about each of the 9 movies now. We're going to be excluding the Clone Wars and talk about things that I like and things that I don't like, the good and the bad. But I guess I should also talk about how I first got introduced to Star Wars. And of course, it was my dad. I guess we had a VHS player at the time, but for some reason he didn't have a copy of the movies. And I remember him telling me about them and how he was a big fan, not crazy like I am, but he was a fan like everyone his age was or is. And I remember him explaining to me about the character of Chewbacca. That's the very first thing I remember hearing about Star Wars. I was very, very young, probably 3. It's actually one of my earliest memories. I remember lying on the waterbed and him telling me that Chewbacca was like this cross between a walrus and a lion and a bear and all these animals that really, don't make sense and probably don't accurately reflect what Chewbacca is. But I was like, what, this sounds pretty cool. So he borrowed, I think, Empire Strikes Back from his boss at the time. And he put it on. I watched it and I was blown away. And ever since that moment, that was obviously a life-defining moment for me. I don't remember my reaction to the movie for the first time, but I just remember that growing up after that point, it was all Star Wars all the time. Obviously, I liked superheroes. I was a big Batman guy. I was a big Spider-Man guy. I like dinosaurs and, ships and boats, and those are the same thing, but planes and helicopters and everything that a kid likes, but Star Wars started taking precedence. I remember when we went camping, I would put my rain boots on and put a black glove over my hand and pretend that I was Luke Skywalker. So yeah, when I was a kid, every day when I'd come home from school or, kindergarten or whatever, I would like to put, Star Wars on. I had a couple of editions of the movies. My dad bought the silver edition and then later the gold edition. The gold edition is the one that I watched the most. I think that came out in 97, but it might have been later. It might have been 99. But that was basically the edition that had most of George's changes. So it has, for example, Jedi rocks, unfortunately. But, on the plus side, it also has the victory celebration theme at the end of Jedi. So yeah, that's the version that I grew up with. And I remember it was a while before I actually saw the fully unaltered 1977 version of A New Hope. And I remember seeing the explosions, that they have just like a little bit less color. They look a little bit worse. Same with the lightsabers, and the dogfight over the Death Star is much slower. So seeing that was like kind of blew my mind. And, also the scenes that were missing. Of course, the Jabba scene wasn't there. But, throughout the series, there's a bunch of changes, big and small. But that's probably something for a different day. But oh yeah, the question. So let's start at the very beginning with a Phantom Menace. I know that's not the beginning in real world time, but I mean, the Phantom Menace. My main memory of that movie, well, I've got two really. First is being at an unrelated movie with my mom, and this was like I was still pretty young at this point. I think Phantom Menace came out in 99, so I would have been 7 at the time. So, not following up with Entertainment Weekly or, reading the online forums or anything. And I remember we were in an unrelated movie. I couldn't even guess what it was. And there's this trailer that comes on. And the first scene is like this rolling green hill and these tanks. And I remember thinking that looks like Star Wars. And then the music plays. And lo and behold, there's a new Star Wars movie coming out. And I remember that was the very first moment that I realized that there were going to be more Star Wars movies. I mean, obviously we knew about the numbering. It was, 4, 5, and 6. So presumably there's, a little slot there. And I mean, any adult, I'm sure, would have known they were coming for some time. But for a 7-year-old kid, probably younger at the time, that was the first time that I really remember. And I blew my mom away because she was like, you could tell it was Star Wars just by looking at those tanks. And it was the AAT tank, the Armored Assault Transport, which doesn't really look like anything in the original trilogy, but it just kind of had this vibe to it. Maybe the music had started to come in. I've got to find the actual trailer that played there. But right away, I kind of knew that this was Star Wars. And then my second main memory is just the crazy marketing push with that movie. Everything, it was so cool as a kid. Everything was Star Wars. Go to KFC, you get Star Wars whatever. You go everywhere, Star Wars. I really like the KFC stuff. I don't know why, but the marketing worked on me as a young man, a very young man. I guess there's a third thing I remember too. When the actual movie came out, everybody who had a birthday anywhere close to the release date went to it. And I must have seen that movie in theaters oh man, I must have seen it at least a dozen times. I remember I had twins as friends. I had 2 of my good buddies were twins, and they each had their own birthday, and we saw it for both of them. I don't remember what time of year the movie came out. I feel like it was. Let me just see this. Okay, so it was in May. So yeah. May 19th, 1999 in Canada. So I had a lot of birthdays that came around that time. And of course I saw it on my own several times. My birthday was, I didn't get to see it for mine because it was too early. But yeah, that, and I don't remember my first impressions. I mean, I'm sure I loved it. I remember loving the Duel of the Fates and just the pod racing scene I didn't like so much. Not as much as my friends. I kind of found that part boring. I think I'd kind of grown out of my cars and trucks phase by then, but I was really enamored by the Trade Federation vehicles, and I liked the space battle at the end. I was fine with the Gungans. I remember I used to do a funny Gungan accent. I really liked the underwater portions with the Bongo, the submarine. And I was just thinking, I had this little game. It was like, I don't even know what you call it. Like, you know those little battery games? Anyways, you played as the Bongo, and you were trying to escape, like, to the surface, and you could only really move three ways. You could kind of orient, like, the tail bit, and the monsters would come, you'd try to get them with the tail, but I don't know. I tried to Google it, and I couldn't find anything online about it. But overall, you know, good feelings. Good feelings about that movie. Good memories, too. Obviously, the marketing worked on me, and I was excited by the time, I guess it was 3 years later, I think, that episode 2 came out. So I was 10 when episode 2 came out. Certainly, that's a big difference maturity-wise. Not as big as the difference between 10 and 13 with Revenge of the Sith, but we'll talk about that when we get there. I remember episode 2, I found a lot of it boring, and people talk about how the Phantom Menace is boring because it's got, like, you know, the trade disputes and blockades and stuff, but as a kid, I feel like you don't really pick up on that, you know? You just kind of like, oh, there's something going on. Just like you don't really understand dissolving the Imperial Senate when you're 6 years old, or you just know that there's good guys, there's bad guys, and that the good guys look like this, the bad guys look like this. They'll probably fight in space. They'll probably have a lightsaber fight. And yeah, I guess I should also talk about how I feel about the films as an adult. So The Phantom Menace is weird. In some ways, it's most closely structured with the original trilogy. It adds a lot in terms of world building, but there's parts of it that are just boring. The writing is, you know, as it is. Like I said, the world building is great. The introduction with the Jedi flying towards the Trade Federation blockade is cool. They've got some nice practical effects there, and later on with the space battle. But it's really mixed for me. I remember when it came back in theaters recently, or not recently, I guess it was a few years ago now. I didn't enjoy it that much, which is kind of sad to say because it is structured very closely, and it's got a kind of sort of similar feeling to the new movies. I mean, it's not the new movies, sorry, the old movies. But yeah, I don't know. It'd probably be one of the last ones that I'd go and watch. And it's probably the one that I, like, after it was released, it's probably the one that I watched the least. Like, after Phantom Menace was released, I definitely just, you know, stuck with the OT on VHS. I mean, it's kind of hard to compete with the bad boys, but I mean, you know, it gets a lot of hate. A lot of it's deserved, but it's got some cool moments too. And it certainly got heart. But yeah, let's move on to Attack of the Clones. And this, I think, is rightly considered by many to be the worst of the Star Wars movies. And I think that that's fair. I definitely understand people who think that Phantom Menace is better. Although, I mean, you can make an argument either way. The movie's kind of a mess. George tried to do a lot with special effects, with the CG, you know. Instead of having actual clone troopers, he animated them all in. I mean, not him personally, but that was a mistake, and the movie suffers from a lot of clunky dialogue. The first bit of the movie is kind of a wash. I mean, besides going for Dex's, but I used to really, really love the Geonosian sequence, the battle, like when the clone troopers come, but more than that, I really loved the arena sequence because you saw all those Jedi. And I remember it sounds weird, but Attack of the Clones was actually one of the movies that kind of cut into my OT screen time. I had that one on DVD, And when we went camping, at some point I got a DVD, like a portable DVD player. And I remember just watching this, like, just, I'd go to the chapter, skip all of the Love on Naboo and, Sanda's Core stuff, and just go to the, what's the name of the arena? It starts with a P, Patar, Paka, I don't know. Go to the arena, watch that, and then I just pick a Jedi and just watch them for as long as I could. And that was awesome to me. My parents did not like that. They found the movie super boring. And when we were camping, I only got to watch it when it was like rainy days. And I guess I couldn't take the OT at the time, but that was definitely my go-to. Now, I'd probably put it as my very worst, but, the end part does, it's just like all of them, there's some redeeming value there. And then, of course, we have the formative years between, so at Attack of the Clones, I would have just turned 10 a couple months earlier, and then May 2005, I would have been 13. So those are big years. I remember I was pretty heavily on the internet at that point. We get the internet late in my house, but I still remember being on it pretty heavily, reading, the Super Shadow forums and just trying to get everything I could, searching when I was 12, searching like Star Wars Episode 3 download before, of course, the movie had even been finished, much less released, much less on DVD. And yeah, I remember being on Super Shadow a lot. I realized, for those who don't know, just Google Super Shadow, you'll find. I actually gave an interview about the Super Shadow website. If you search my name, you might be able to find it. But, or just search Super Shadow. But I remember when the first trailer came out for Revenge of the Sith, that was one thing that Super Shadow got right. They got the first trailer basically scene for scene. And I remember seeing it for the first time with my buddy and calling each and every scene that was going to come. And he was like, "Oh my God, how did you know that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's so predictable." Pretending that I'm this, me being this huge Star Wars fan somehow gave me this very specific knowledge. And I watched that trailer back on, Windows Media Viewer or whatever it was called. I watched that trailer so many times. I remember seeing the Utapauans and thinking that they were going to be the bad guys, and I consumed that trailer a lot. I really liked Revenge of the Sith, and I still do. It's a very, very watchable movie. I mean, does it have some issues? Sure, it has some issues, but I mean, I was so hyped up when I saw that trailer, and I was so hyped up going to see that movie. I can't not remember seeing Attack of the Clones in theaters. I just can't. But I remember seeing Revenge of the Sith. My dad couldn't come with me for whatever reason. He was doing something, but people were, even though the, two prequels had really dampened people's spirits, it's like Revenge of the Sith was kind of a new hope. Pun intended. And everyone was dressed up. It was crazy. It was lots of fun. And I really enjoyed the movie. I tried to explain to my dad why it was so good and why Vader's turn to the dark side made sense, but I couldn't. I was just like, you gotta go see it. You gotta go see it. Some of my friends didn't like it at that point. One of my friends still argues that Revenge of the Sith is the worst of the movies and that the Phantom Menace is the best of the prequels, which is actually an argument I've heard before. People who are Star Wars purists, I think, often kind of take that point of view. But if you get invested in the prequels as being a separate but also important story, I think that Revenge of the Sith is pretty hard to beat. It adds a lot. The greatest thing about Revenge of the Sith for me is the way that the Clone Wars is shown. Like, you just get snippets. During Order 66, for example, you get snippets of all these different planets. You see all these new vehicles that you see, for just a second. I'm trying to think of the name of that. What's the name of that walker that you see for just a second? It's called like the sleigh or something, like the Republic sleigh. Oh, it's the Trident. The Republic Trident, for example. You see that for 2 seconds, but it's a whole model. It doesn't really appear in anything else. But it does do a good job of the Total War feel. It feels like the movie goes really quickly when you watch it too, which for me is a sign that I'm really enjoying it. especially the first little bit. Like, really, when Obi-Wan leaves for Utapau, that's the shifting point. The movie totally changes there. Anakin's ready to fall to the dark side. The two aren't together as friends anymore, and I feel like you get there so quickly, and I just wish you got a bit more time with the two of them. I guess the Clone Wars series sort of helps in that regard, but it's something I would have liked to see. Build up their rapport a bit in the medium, like in the films, would have been nice for me. But another thing that I read recently is that George originally anticipated the opening battle of Coruscant to be like kind of shots of 5 different battles. So like you would have had Coruscant and then other space battles going on consecutively. Instead, they kind of used that idea for Order 66, where you kind of flash around the galaxy. But how cool would that have been as an introduction? Like, that if we would have had that, we would have had a whole new bevy of Republic ships, because George would not have reused the same ships in the prequels for different scenes. So that would have been cool. But alas, the sheer cost of designing, I don't know whether they use models for the capital ships, probably for the close-up ones. But the cost of having to design everything there would have been extravagant. So I guess they just kind of went with the brief shots of Order 66, and most of that is, pretty limited in scope. So yeah, Revenge of the Sith is a cool Total War type of movie. I loved it as a kid. I still do like it. I live tweeted it the other day, and I'll probably do so again at some point. That was my second time attempting. The first time I fell asleep because I don't remember what I was doing. I was probably having a beer or something, and I fell asleep watching it. But I finished it last time, and then I also did New Hope, which I guess we're going to get to in just a second. I don't know if I want to go straight to New Hope or if I want to stop at Rogue One. Let's stop at Rogue One. And Rogue One is probably the least favorite of mine of the new movies. I still like it, but it kind of misses a little bit of the heart and soul that the other ones have. Like, the characters I really didn't care about very much at all, besides for maybe Krennic and, the established characters like Vader and Tarkin. But yeah, I didn't care much about the characters. I remember going in and watching the movie and being like, man, I hardly know these characters' names, much less like anything about them or their motivations. So that was kind of a downer for me, and I really liked the mythology bits of Star Wars. So like I like the Jedi a lot. Definitely one of my favorite parts of the movie. Yoda, one of my favorite characters. So the fact that that was lacking, and that's just the way it is, means that the movie kind of takes a sideline for me. And I'm sure the same thing will be true with Han Solo. But the space battle at the end was incredible. That was one of the best space battles in Star Wars history. We had awesome ship variety. That was the best part, probably the ship variety. We had really cool scenes with the X-Wings. The air to space battle was really cool, going through the shield gate. But the whole movie before that, for me, it's like, yeah, you can take it or leave it. It's cool that we got new ship designs. I like the U-Wing. I like the various new TIE designs. I like that we got to see a Juggernaut in action again. But yeah, it was fine. I liked it, but it's probably my least favorite of the new movies. The Vader scene. But you can't say I dislike it, and I can't say that I wish it hadn't been made, because I do like it. Just for the last, it kind of, suffers from a Return of the Jedi symptom in a little bit, where the last bit of the movie is so good, but the beginning part is like pretty much a total drag. So yeah, it's good though. But let's move now, I think, since we've firmly put ourselves in the chronological category. Sorry. Let's move now to A New Hope. And I actually, as I was saying, I live tweeted A New Hope the other day, and there's just something about that movie that's so magical. Even though I, never, by the time I had seen A New Hope, I saw it as a kid, a very young child. So by the time I was old enough to realize the true spectacle of the thing, I'd already been immersed in it for so long, kind of like, the Seinfeld effect. Nothing's funny because like it's the kind of humor that we're already used to. I don't know if I've described that phenomenon well, but the same was kind of true for me with A New Hope. But even though I didn't realize how groundbreaking everything was as a young man or as a kid, there was still something about that movie that was just so magical to me. And I think that really comes down to the characters and the world building more than the special effects. Like, for me, as a kid, when Star Wars' special effects, like, when I say Star Wars, I mean A New Hope. Star Wars' special effects, they were good, but by that time, we had, Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back and whatever else was dividing my attention. So Star Wars' special effects weren't, the main reason to watch the movie. It was because I loved the Death Star as a scene, like as a place. It reminded me of, like, for some reason the Death Star always reminded me of my local mall, but like in a warm, cozy way, which is such a weird way to describe the Death Star. And like Tatooine, it felt so alive, and Luke and the droids, and it's just like the characters are so warm and so pleasant and watchable. And there are parts of the movie that, like, watching back, you almost feel like it's a bit amateurish, but it's just so good. It feels like old sci-fi in a good way. That, like, I don't think any of the other, like, it definitely, you feel the Flash Gordon a lot harder than you do in any of the subsequent movies. Like, it just feels like something that's a part of history, and that, like you can't even really describe how you feel when watching that movie. You just know that it's like something massive, and the foundation for everything, really. And I swear, even now when I watch the movie, you notice new little details, like a new little bit on the Death Star, or like, something different about the Millennium Falcon. And there's been so much that's been said about the movie, and so much that's been written, and I've, consumed so much of it. I watched the Star Wars Minute podcast, and that literally, it was 20 minutes on every single minute of A New Hope. So, like, there's so much there, and it all feels like it was so lovingly crafted, and it's become such, like, a cultural thing. And it just reminds me of like good times and being a kid. So, although, like, when you look back at A New Hope, the plot, it's not groundbreaking. There's not the Death Star, trench run when compared to, like, if you ignore the technological achievement that it is, when you compare it next to some of the other final moments of Star Wars, although the emotional impact is certainly there, it's not like the same visual spectacle as the Battle of Endor, in my opinion. But still, it's still hard for me to say that it's not my favorite movie. But I don't think it is, but for some reason it beats out Empire, which is weird. But yeah, as a kid, that would be one of the movies I would watch that so often. And yeah, you don't really understand everything that's going on. You know that R2's got the Death Star plans that have the weakness. You know that Luke needs to use a torpedo to blow it up. The Empire is bad. You don't know how long they've been around. You don't know, like, how much power the Senate ever had, or, there's some details that you miss, but it's a very, very consumable product, and it's awesome. The Tatooine, to me, was just such a cool planet, and the creature cantina was amazing. Like, I used to go back, and I think, like, all of us did, and watch every specific scene, and you could always find a new monster, even though some of them were rehashed horror costumes that, happened to be by in whatever studio they were in. Every creature felt unique in its own way. And it's just, putting into words what I've been thinking is the universe feels very real and very lived in. And I don't think, my computer turning off? And I don't think any of the movies have managed to capture that as well as New Hope did. But it's with the original trilogy, they're like, all three of them are my children. Empire Strikes Back was amazing, obviously. I as an adult watching it, I can understand why it's seen as the, best Star Wars movie, because watching it, it's like the perfect movie. The chemistry between Leia and Han and Harrison and Carrie is like undeniable, and it's funny, and the funny moments are so organic and so natural. The asteroid chase with the John Williams music is definitely one of the most impressive and immersive and just pure joyous scenes in cinema, at least in my opinion. It's like you're on a roller coaster with the Falcon dipping and diving and Williams accompanying it. It's incredible. The movie scared me a bit when I was a kid. A New Hope didn't, because it was very light, but the later ones, they definitely scared me. I was scared when Vader chops Luke's hand off and Luke screams and he cries, because like that's Luke, like that's your hero. Like, to see him cry and to be like a blubbering mess is like, that's like, man, that's your hero, and he's been reduced to that. But yeah, I definitely didn't enjoy some of, or not that I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't appreciate some of the complexity when I was, like if I was, 5 years old and I was choosing between Empire and A New Hope, it'd probably be A New Hope, because I missed out on some of the complexity. But I think Empire will be the next movie that I live tweet. It's definitely the one of the original three that I've watched the least. I've still watched it, hundreds of times, but it's definitely the one that I've watched the least. I didn't like the Dagobah parts much as a kid, which is strange because I love them now as an adult. I love, hearing Yoda wax philosophically, and I like how silly he is, and it's just it's Empire Strikes Back. Really, it brought Star Wars, like, what makes science fiction good a lot of the time is that it serves as a lens to, tell you things about your real world through, a fictional world. So that means that you can make, sometimes the connections aren't obvious, but sometimes you can also say things very overtly. Like, the Empire. Obviously, the Empire can be said to represent a lot of things. I've talked about before how Palpatine was described in, George's original ideas as a sort of Nixonian gangster. And, there's very clear implications, real world implications, and George has a message. And you see that in Star Wars. I think the message is kind of a little bit more limited, and then you get to Empire, and we've got the, Yoda, every single thing he says can be deconstructed. And yeah, I mean, I didn't like Dagobah as a kid. It wasn't bright. It was very dark and, dank and gloomy. Obviously, as an adult, it's like, well, this is just a different place. It sort of shows Yoda's, how crazy Yoda's like self-seclusion was. He's at this place where there's snakes everywhere and it's murky. You lose an X-Wing if you park it in the wrong spot. But yeah, I liked the Battle of Hoth a lot. Obviously, I thought that was cool. When I remember every time it snowed as a kid, I'd pretend that I was Luke, trying to survive like after the Wampa, which is kind of a weird thing to like play as. Because Luke's like, he's like dying in the cold. But yeah, and it doesn't have the grand like space battle too at the end. And that was one of the things that I was most like into as a kid. But Empire, like, it's so good. It's definitely one of the, it's the perfect sequel, really, because it takes the established universe from A New Hope and expands upon it, but in a way that doesn't feel cheap. Like, you get the Executor, like Vader's flagship, and you're like, yeah, we saw a bit of the Empire in the first one. Like, I can totally believe that they've got this massive, behemoth star cruiser. And yeah, like, you learn about new characters, like Lando, for example. He's a new character that's introduced in, a good way. And then, of course, you've got like the expanding relationship between Vader and Luke. Everything changes from that moment on. So yeah, like, it added a lot to the universe without compromising. I don't think it lessens anything doesn't cheapen anything. It doesn't compromise anything that we learn or that we feel in A New Hope. A New Hope is still a story. It's still an important story, but we learn in Empire that it's just the beginning, but not in a way that makes the Death Star attack feel in any way inconsequential or unimportant, or, it doesn't make, I almost said Uncle Ben. It doesn't make Ben Kenobi feel any less important. It still ties him in, which is nice. So, yeah. And it sets the series up for what, as a child, was my favorite Return of the Jedi. And Return of the Jedi, I think it's a bit too... Well, no, I'm too friendly with Return of the Jedi. I don't give it enough criticism. Return of the Jedi, it has such a weak beginning. And even part of the Endor parts are pretty weak. I loved the Jabba's Palace bit when I was a kid. I mean, I didn't like the singing, but I liked the scene because we had all... It was kind of like... It was like Tatooine 2... I mean, I'm saying it's like Tatooine 2.0. It was Tatooine 2.0, but it took... parts from A New Hope that I really liked. The location, the lived-in palace was similar in a lot of ways to what we saw in A New Hope. We have all these new creatures, which are all, very original. And yeah, it brought that lived-in part of the world that I really liked. And it was a very small story, and in the same way that, the events on Tatooine in the first one was, which I enjoyed. But yeah, it is kind of boring. It definitely drags on. It blows my mind. Whenever I think about Return of the Jedi, I always think the movie starts when Palpatine gets off his shuttle. And for some reason, I always think in my mind that that's the very first scene, but no, that's Vader. You don't actually get Palpatine until like 35 minutes in the movie. That's not until Han's been rescued and everything. So yeah, it's like a lot of downtime. And originally George wanted 9 movies, and the events of that were to be basically one movie itself. So, and then the trilogy through 9 was going to be the face off with the Empire, or the Emperor, I mean. So yeah, that, and some of that is supposed to be resulting from the loss of his divorce from his wife. I think her name is Marcia, who was one of his editors, and she really, I guess she had a great eye for it, and she really kind of reined George in, which seems like it's been a very important part of Star Wars. And when he's not reined in, we see what happens with Jedi and with the prequels, and when he is, we see as probably the most shining example, Empire Strikes Back. But yeah, from that point on, some of the stuff on Endor is a little too cutesy and a little slow. But I mean, I loved the Ewoks as kids. I thought they were so cute. But all of that is really secondary to the incredible end. And when I was a kid, if I was going to watch Return of the Jedi, sometimes I'd watch the whole thing, but very often I would just skip to the part where Luke is brought to the Emperor, because that's when you have my favorite bits. For one, you have the Battle of Endor, which is just incredible. That's like a pure spectacle, and it's very well done. It's not gratuitous. It's not excessive. The effects are all practical. It's such an incredible achievement, and I could I'll just watch it. I'll pull up my version of Jedi that I've got saved on my computer for editing purposes, and I'll just watch it. And I've also got an edited down version that I made that I use sometimes when I want lots of space action but don't want to have to cut out. I'll just watch that. And it's awesome. I like it more than Scarif. It's my favorite space battle. But I also really, really like the thing that brought Star Wars to me to a whole nother level was Vader's redemption. And Luke almost falls to the dark side, says, "I'm a Jedi like my father before me." And then it's the love between father and son, like the persistent love between father and son, which ends up bringing Vader back to the good side. And that to me is what brings that moment where the moment where where Palpatine is shocking Luke, and you see Vader look back and forth between his master and his son, and it's like you can like he's got a mask on, of course, but it's like his face is so expressive. It's got, the lightning reflecting off of it and everything, and that's what Star Wars is to me. It's, obviously the Star Wars movies anyway. Obviously, the lore is important, the plot is important, but what's more important is the story, the overall themes. I mean, you want to talk about plot. Vader picks Palpatine up and throws him over a ledge to kill him. This is like one of the most powerful beings in the universe, and he gets killed by being tossed down a chute. So it's like, but you don't really think about that, because what you're thinking about is like what you've just learned and how Vader's sacrifice has made you feel, and how, like, the love, father and son, like that's what's important. How the characters have changed, and yeah, like to me, that's why I like Return of the Jedi so much, because you get that full for the last little bit, and then, I also really liked the, kind of off topic, but I really liked the setting of the Emperor's like throne tower, like his throne room, but like also the whole tower itself. Such a cool idea. It was kind of one of those other places that, it felt like it would really exist. It's got all these walkways and these back corners that, you just see for a second. Like, it's got, like, little areas that you see for 1 second and then never again. That's what makes something feel real to me. It's like in A New Hope, how they have the command room when they kill Paul Treatham, that Imperial, like the first one that Chewbacca kills when they go in the room. Like, that room feels like a place that would actually exist, in this universe at least. And yeah, I really like the Palpatine's tower for that reason, which is random, I know, but I thought the windows were really cool too. I was like, if I had an office, it'd be like that. Maybe not all black, maybe all black though. Probably pretty cozy. Maybe put a couple TVs up. Yeah. What was I saying? But yeah, that's why I like. And then you move from that. Like, at that point, your emotions are running high, and then you move to Luke burning Vader at the funeral pyre, or his armor at the funeral pyre. Oh, yeah, and of course, when his mask is off, and he's like, oh man, this guy who we see, the first thing he does is break someone's neck and throw him against the wall. He's tortured his own daughter. He's chopped off his son's hand, but then he's just this old man, this sad old man. Like, that's, perfect. And then Luke burns his body. Eyebrows are not, depending on the special edition. And then you get my favorite part of the entire series, the special edition theme, like the victory celebration theme. I really don't like Yub Nub. I find it to be a super disappointing way to end the trilogy. My favorite version is the whatever version was the gold version, 1997, I think, that had it had the special edition music. So it had Victory Celebration. Didn't have Naboo because Naboo wasn't invented yet. Didn't have Gungans because Gungans weren't invented yet. Didn't have Hayden Christensen because Hayden Christensen was invented, but he wasn't old enough, and Revenge of the Sith hadn't happened yet. So you get, basically, in my opinion, all the great parts of the ending put together. And to me, like, that song is just it's so perfect. It's uplifting, but there's also, like, a bit of sadness, sort of, but I don't know. It's perfect in a way. And then, like, at the end, it's a celebration. I mean, it's perfect. And then at the end, where Luke looks over and sees the Force ghosts, like, come on. It's like, yep, like, you made it. That's enough to, like, occasionally, if I'm like in a particularly emotional mood, like, if I watch that scene, it will be tugging at the eyes a little bit. So yeah, Return of the Jedi, incredibly flawed movie, but I love it so much just because of how it makes me feel in the ending. And because I've got such positive associations with the film, I'm lucky because I like watching the early stuff, like the Jabba's Palace stuff. I like watching it because even though I can realize that objectively it's kind of crappy, I enjoy it, and I've got such positive feelings with it. So that's why it's my favorite movie. But like I said, the other two are really close behind. The prequels don't match up, but I still like them in a different way, though. It's a different part of me that likes them most often. Yeah, I wish I could have seen. I wish I could have been an adult and seen the original trilogy before seeing the prequels. Because going back, like my view of the Jedi, what the Jedi are and then what they weren't, has been changed by the prequels. And I would have liked to see, how I would have thought the Force worked, how I would have thought the Jedi existed. Like, yeah, we know they're guardians, but are they more like Obi-Wan, like old wizards, or like Yoda, another old wizard, kind of meditating a lot and, guardians of peace, but not warriors, which again, I guess is kind of the mythological, even in lore, it's the mythological root of the Jedi. But yeah, it would have been interesting, but I don't remember what I thought. It's, your brain's so malleable. Those early years are so formative. It all kind of sort of fits together, which brings us to the sequel trilogy. And I'm really curious to see how the sequel trilogy will be regarded 20 years down the road. I think positively. More so than the prequels, I think. And I think we'll also learn that George had a bigger hand in these movies than Lucasfilm has told us so far. I think we're more heavily following a version of George's story than we know. So, we'll talk about 7. One thing I should say is I've been spoiled for both movies. Someone spoiled 7 on Facebook, and then someone for 8 messaged me spoilers. For 7, I don't really think it affected my viewing experience. I knew Han was going to die. I was prepared, but it still hit me pretty emotionally. Han wasn't my favorite character in the original trilogy. Obviously, I still loved him, but I always liked Luke more. But, yeah, it's just... they did such a good job of making Kylo a brat. And, I really enjoyed the movie. I remember thinking, oh, man, seeing the Poe and Finn dynamic, I was like, oh, man, we're in good hands. I did feel a bit let down by how similar some things were to the original trilogy, though I understood it when I left. I wished we had gotten, obviously I wished we'd gotten a space battle. I wish the scope was a little bit bigger, but for me, one of my favorite Star Wars moments is when Rey uses the Force on Anakin's lightsaber and the Burning Homestead theme plays. I remember watching that. Oh man, I cried. I looked over my fiance. She likes Star Wars. I introduced the movies to her, and she's crying too. That was such a powerful moment. And I remember going home desperately trying to find a torrent so I could watch it again. And I remember after watching the movie too, just an overwhelming feeling of positivity, which for some reason people try to shit on so hard online. But I just remember feeling okay, we did what we needed. Well, not we. I had nothing to do with it. But, what's needed to be done to get Star Wars back into a healthy place has been done. And now we can tell interesting new stories. So yeah, overwhelming feeling of positivity after that movie. Watching it back, of course, it's so hard nowadays, Obviously, the internet was around for the prequels, but it wasn't for the OT, to a limited extent. But it's now there has to be one opinion that shapes everyone. And you've got to stay away from that. Figure out whether you like the movie, not whether Reddit thinks that it's too derivative or whether South Park lampoons it or, on the other hand, whether critics all say it's great or you watch online people telling you that you should like it or whatever. It's all garbage. People find a need to tell other people to find reassurance in their thoughts. And some people are a bit more aggressive about that and try to push their thoughts on others and find reassurance in that way. Other people, and I think I'm one of these, like the second group, try to make sure that my opinion is what, is right, which is bull, because especially with art, which is subjective. I liked the movie. I really liked the movie, actually. All my friends that I saw it with liked it too. One was a bit, lukewarm on it, but I really liked it. And I wish that, personally, that I would have just left it at that. Because, yeah, obviously, it's, you do get a little disappointed when you think about, when people are criticizing, the biggest movie in the world to bits, you're going to find flaws. But yeah, I still like the movie quite a bit. And yeah, there were other things that I would change. Yeah. Would Star Wars Legends make a better movie? No. I'll talk about that another day. But again, Star Wars is about themes. The movies are about themes. The plot, there's issues with the plot, but not as bad as the prequels in a lot of ways. The prequels, people think that the sequel trilogy takes a dump on Star Wars lore. Oh man, the way people imagine things before the prequels, nothing has happened to the degree of Chewie knowing Yoda, or midichlorians, or the way the Jedi are portrayed, that kind of fundamentally changed forever how people saw something. Yeah, I guess let's transition this into episode 8. Yeah, Luke's character is different than we expected. But it's different, it's not, it makes sense within the universe. And it's not necessarily what we would have wanted, what some people would have wanted. I was personally completely fine with it. Luke was always kind of a flawed individual. But it's not necessarily what some of us would have wanted, but it's all towards this greater theme. And Star Wars is all about love. In the prequel trilogy, we learn about, coveting people and the dangers of love. Anakin turns to the dark side because he loved Padme and his mother in a non-healthy way, but he also, there's limitations placed by the Jedi Order, and that's why I love the prequels too, because they have these themes that are sometimes expressed in a messy way, but are still there. And yeah, we talk about, the prequels is all about unhealthy love. The Jedi kind of restrict it in certain ways. Obi-Wan talks about how Anakin was his brother and that he loved him, but Anakin couldn't even talk to him about the most important thing is in his entire life. And then the way he covets Palpatine, the way he covets Padme, and they have sort of the unequal power dynamic between the two of them. And then the original trilogy is about a different kind of love between father and son, largely, I think. But also it's kind of about family, and then we see kind of each family member introduced in at episode 4. We get the father figure who's absent, but who turns out to be more of a mentor. Then we get another one in episode 5 with Yoda, and also the development in the friendship between the trio. I guess less so for Luke because he's away for most of them. But we also kind of get the fatherly bit, a little bit, a peek of it, and then we get it fully expressed in episode 6. And then the sequel trilogy is obviously about a different kind of love. It's back to romantic kind of love, this time between Kylo and Rey. And people who, it's I didn't see it after episode 7. Although after I listened to some stuff by Wayward Jedi, it became so clear. And after episode 8, people who think that Rey and Kylo aren't going to end up together, like, no. Like they are. I mean, it's so obvious, and that's fine, because Star Wars has always just kind of been the same sort of fairy tale or stories retold and repackaged in an interesting way. And I don't have any problem. I really like thematically where the sequel trilogy is going. The issue, if I have any issue with episode 8, it'd be in some of the way the plot progressed. But I was really, like, I put out a pretty negative review of the movie after I first saw it, but I think a lot of that was influenced by the fact that I was spoiled. Specifically, the fact that I think I really didn't like the fact that Snoke died. I was totally cool with Rey's parents. That's 100% what I was expecting. I didn't at first like that Snoke died and that we got no space battle, that the universe didn't really get any bigger. But it's really a lot like in Empire Strikes Back in that sort of way. But yeah, now I quite like the movie. It's just the bit I go most back and forth on is probably Snoke as a character, and the fact that, like, I still wish we got more of, like, the New Republic and more of Luke's Jedi Order, and, like, those are plot issues though, not theme issues or story issues. But yeah, those are the parts that I don't really like. And it's like if we go to Legends, it had such interesting plot sometimes. I mean, some stories are garbage, but overall, the world building of the Legends was fairly good. It wasn't consistently good, but it was fairly good. And overall, it was good. Although, like, there were weak points, overall, it was good. And I'd say even some of the bad books contribute to world building in good ways. That's the area where 7 and 8 have lacked the most in world building. Like, the Resistance is obviously pretty close to the Alliance. The First Order are an interesting enemy. I like them, but I wish that I wish that the world had developed more since episode 6, and I wish we got to see more familiar enemies. More familiar aliens. That's a small one, but even just having a hut at Canto Bight would have been it would have helped, because I think that's the main issue is sometimes the sequel trilogy feels a bit disjointed from everything. And I mean, the exact same thing is true between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. And I'm sure by the time we get the next sequel trilogy, the 9 movies will feel each trilogy as a different independent bit, but as a greater whole. And then what comes next will feel new. And, we gotta, like, say what you will, episode 7 was derivative in some ways. But Disney has given us, or it's not Disney. Disney doesn't have anything to do with this. It's Lucasfilm, 100% Lucasfilm. Lucasfilm has given us something different, something that's challenging us, and change that's, but still the fulfillment of something greater, a greater arc that I think will be exposed in episode 9. But I think that's a story for a different day. I think we're nearing the end of my rant for today. So what's my favorite Star Wars movie? Return of the Jedi. Will I rank the other ones? No, I don't think so. Because I love them all for different reasons. I mean, I think the original trilogy for me stands head and shoulders above the rest. But I don't know if the prequel trilogy ever made me feel like Yoda in The Last Jedi, which, seeing Yoda, hearing Yoda's advice, like, it's still like that got to me. That felt like Yoda, and that felt like that was the kind of earthly wisdom that I feel like Star Wars is best when it's dispensing that sort of earthly wisdom, and it's just, yeah, there we grow beyond. And that, like, I don't know if the prequel trilogy ever made me feel like that, but, like, the world building I think was a bit better. So, like, there's aspects of both, like, you can say that, but then There's a moment in the prequel trilogy that's great, or there's world building in the sequel trilogy that's great. So it's like you can't choose. I can't rank the movies. They're my children. They're not my children. I guess you would say that they're my, I didn't create them. It's kind of presumptuous to call them your children, but what I meant to say is it's like choosing between children. You like them all equally, different but the same. So I still think Return of the Jedi is number one. I don't think. Well, I guess number two would be A New Hope, and then 3 would be Empire Strikes Back. But I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years I like A New Hope most, or I like Empire most. Well, I would be a little surprised, but maybe in 20 years. And then after that, it's fair game. I really like them all. This franchise is obviously very important to me. And if you've gotten this far in the video, it's important to you. We're just over an hour, so I think now is the time to wrap it up. Let me know what you guys thought of this long style discussion about Star Wars, maybe a bit about life. And let me know what you want to hear me talk about next. I would like to keep it about Star Wars, legends, canon, real world, fictional, whatever, but I'd like to keep about Star Wars for now. In the future, I'd also like to maybe talk about what it's like being a YouTuber, because I know that's something that a lot of you guys have been wondering, and I'm fairly new at it myself. But yeah, what else do you want to hear me talk about? What did you enjoy about this episode? What should I work on? What did you just straight up not enjoy? I know that I'm a bit disjointed with how I speak. I break into a lot of ums. There's some long gaps. I start sentences and don't finish it. That's not something that I can just fix, but it's something that I consciously work on every episode. So, words like so or whatever, or just doing that. I'll work on it. I'll get better. But I already know that that's an issue I have, and it's something that, well, maybe by the time we're in episode 30 of the Rambling series, we'll see a bit of a difference. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, this has been Eckhart's Ladder. May the Force be with you.